The wrong target. The night was supposed to be quiet. The city streets glowed under flickering yellow lamps, wet from a light drizzle that had left the pavement slick. Cars rolled slowly, their headlights painting broken streaks of white across the asphalt. On one side of the street, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled into a parking spot. Its engine hummed low before shutting off. The door opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall, her frame muscular yet graceful, moving with a calm authority that seemed to belong to her like second nature. She wore dark jeans, a black coat, and boots. Nothing about her shouted wealth, yet there was an aura of power around her that made those watching hesitate without knowing why. Sergeant Chad Wilkinson leaned against his cruiser just across the street, cigarette dangling from his lips. His partner, Officer Mark Dalton, sat inside, sipping cheap coffee. They weren't supposed to be here. They were supposed to be patrolling 2 districts over. But this stretch of road, quiet and affluent, had become their favorite hunting ground. They weren't after criminals. They were after victims. People they could intimidate. People they could humiliate. And when Chad saw the black woman step out of the expensive SUV, something ugly twisted in his mind. His lips curled into a smirk. "Looks like a good night after all," he muttered. Dalton raised an eyebrow. "What's the move?" he asked, though he already knew. With Chad, the move was always the same. Find someone who didn't look like they belonged, slap cuffs on them, and remind the world who had the badge. "Luxury ride, black woman, alone," Chad said, flicking his cigarette to the ground. "You know how it goes. Easy stop. Show the neighborhood who's in charge." Within moments, the flashing red and blue lights came alive, reflecting off wet pavement. The cruiser pulled up behind the SUV. The woman turned, unbothered, her face calm, her stance steady. She didn't flinch as the 2 men stepped out, hands resting on their belts, arrogance dripping from every movement. "Evening, ma'am," Chad sneered, voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Mind telling us what you're doing in this neighborhood?" The woman's dark eyes studied him, sharp as blades. Her tone was level, deep, steady. "Walking to my meeting." Dalton chuckled. "Meeting, huh? At this hour? Sounds suspicious to me. Why don't you step over here?" People were beginning to notice. Curtains pulled back. Pedestrians slowed their pace. Phones were lifted discreetly. The woman didn't move, but her presence filled the air with something heavy, something commanding. "Hands behind your back," Chad barked suddenly, his voice rising. "You're under arrest." The woman's gaze didn't falter. She didn't fight, didn't plead. Slowly she turned, placing her wrists together. The metallic click of the cuffs echoed like a gunshot in the street. But even as Chad shoved her against the hood of the car, twisting her arm with cruel force, she didn't wince. Her back remained straight, her head remained high. Then she spoke, low, cold, final. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The words cut through the night. Chad's grin faltered. Dalton shifted uncomfortably. Around them, whispers grew louder. Cameras captured every second. But the woman's voice carried a weight neither officer understood. Because this was no ordinary woman. This was Brigadier General Danielle Brooks, one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States military, and with a single phone call, their lives were about to collapse. The call that changed everything, the cuffs dug into Danielle Brooks' wrists, but she didn't flinch. Her breathing was steady, her shoulders unshaken, her face calm like a soldier who had stared douse and chaos before. To the officers, it was a sign of defiance. To the growing crowd, it was something else. Dignity under fire. People whispered. Cameras stayed locked on her, recording every second of the unfolding humiliation. Sergeant Chad Wilkinson smirked as he pressed her harder against the hood of the police cruiser. "Think you're tough? Out here flashing cars that don't belong to you? You should be grateful we caught you before you got yourself in real trouble." The general slowly turned her head, her voice steady, almost quiet, but each syllable struck harder than any shout. "You don't know who you're talking to, and you don't know how badly you've just ruined your lives." Dalton, the younger officer, scoffed nervously. "Save the speeches. People like you always think they're special. Tonight, you'll learn who really has the power." For the first time, Danielle allowed a hint of a smile to touch her lips. Not a smile of fear, but of certainty. She lifted her chin, twisted her cuffed hands slightly, and with slow precision, pulled a sleek black phone from the side pocket of her coat. The officers froze. "Hey, you don't get to use a phone," Chad barked, grabbing at it, but she pulled back just enough, her eyes never leaving his. "One call," she said, her voice low, cold as steel. "One call, and you'll wish tonight never happened." The crowd's energy shifted. People leaned closer. They could feel something brewing, something larger than two arrogant cops on a rainy street. Phones streamed live across social media. Hashtags were already forming. Danielle pressed a button, lifted the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice. Then a deep voice answered, sharp, clipped, carrying the weight of command. "General Brooks, this is the Pentagon Operations Desk. Go ahead." The entire street went silent. Even the hum of passing cars seemed to fade. Chad's jaw slackened, Dalton's face drained of color. The word general rang in their ears like a thunderclap. Danielle's tone never shifted, calm, controlled, terrifying in its precision. This is Brooks. I am currently detained by 2 officers of the city police. I need verification sent immediately, and I want the names of these men on my desk before morning." "Yes, ma'am," the voice replied instantly. No hesitation, no questions, just obedience. "We are dispatching military liaisons to your location now." She ended the call, sliding the phone back into her coat with the ease of someone who had done far more dangerous things. Around her, the crowd buzzed with shock. Someone whispered, "She's a general?" Another gasped, "Oh my God, they cuffed a general?" Chad tried to laugh, but his voice cracked. "That's a nice trick. Anyone can pretend." Then the sound hit them, not sirens, not traffic, the low thrum of engines, heavy, powerful, growing louder by the second. Military SUVs appeared at the end of the block, headlights slicing through the drizzle. They moved with precision, pulling up beside the stunned officers. Doors swung open and men in crisp uniforms stepped out, their insignias gleaming under the street lamps. The lead officer approached, saluting sharply. "General Brooks, are you unharmed?" The world flipped in an instant. Danielle stood tall, still cuffed, but her presence now loomed larger than ever. She inclined her head. "I'm fine. Take note of this abuse. These 2 men thought they could treat me like a criminal because of the color of my skin." Chad and Dalton staggered back, panic dawning. Dalton stuttered, "Wait, General? You're really—" "Yes," she cut him off, her voice now rising, commanding the entire street. "I am Brigadier General Danielle Brooks. I've commanded soldiers across oceans. I've stood where lives depended on my orders. And tonight, you decided I was nothing more than a suspect because I was black in the wrong neighborhood." The military officers moved swiftly, removing the cuffs, checking her wrists with quiet respect. The crowd erupted, some in applause, others in disbelief. Cameras caught every second, live streams flooding feeds across the city. Danielle turned one last time to Chad and Dalton. Her eyes were sharp, unrelenting. "Justice wears many uniforms. Tonight, yours just fell apart. The Pentagon already has your names. Your careers are over. Consider this your last abuse of power." Chad's face collapsed into rage and fear, Dalton's into regret. Neither spoke, neither dared. Around them, the weight of what had just happened settled like thunderclouds ready to burst. And in that moment, the 2 racist cops finally realized they hadn't arrested a powerless woman. They had arrested the one person who could end them with a single phone call. The fallout begins. By dawn, the story had already swept through the city like wildfire. Videos of the arrest flooded social media, clips of Danielle Brooks standing tall in cuffs, her calm voice declaring, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Millions watched in disbelief as the live streams revealed the arrival of military vehicles, the salute from Pentagon liaisons, and the 2 officers left pale, shaking, and speechless. News anchors replayed the footage on loop. Hashtags trended. #General Brooks, #Justice in uniform, #Cops exposed. The city woke up to headlines that no one could ignore. Racist officers humiliate black female general. One phone call to the Pentagon shakes local police department. In precinct headquarters, Sergeant Chad Wilkinson slammed his fist against the desk, sweat dripping down his neck. "They can't do this to us. She was just another suspect. We had every right to question her." His words sounded desperate, hollow. He knew the truth. There had been no suspicion, no crime, just arrogance. Dalton sat slumped in the corner, his face pale. "Chad, she's a general, a real one. You heard it." They saluted her. "We're finished." But Chad wasn't ready to admit defeat. "No, we spin this. Say she resisted. Say she reached for something. People will believe us." Yet even as he spoke, the EVI, dense, was everywhere. Dozens of phones had captured the scene. Every angle told the same story. Two cops using prejudice as a weapon, and a woman who stood taller than their cruelty. Meanwhile, at a Pentagon conference room, Danielle Brooks sat at a long table, her posture unbroken, her eyes sharp. Around her were senior officials and military aides, each one treating her with the respect she had earned over decades of service. A four-star general leaned forward, his voice controlled but furious. "General Brooks, the president himself has been briefed. What those officers did wasn't just misconduct. It was a national embarrassment. Rest assured, this will be dealt with." Danielle's tone was calm, but there was a fire beneath it. "This isn't about me. I'll recover. But this is about every woman, every man, every child who's been treated the same way without the rank or the voice to fight back. If this happened to me in full view of the public, imagine what happens in the shadows." Silence followed her words. The room knew she was right. Her dignity had turned into a weapon sharper than any blade. Back in the city, the police chief faced reporters swarming the station. His face was tight, his words rehearsed. "We take these allegations very seriously. The officers involved have been placed on immediate suspension pending federal review." But suspension was only the beginning. The Pentagon had already demanded files, records, body cam footage. The system that had once protected Chad and Dalton was cracking under the weight of scrutiny. Chad stormed out of the station, cameras flashing in his face. "This is political. She's exaggerating," he shouted, but his voice trembled, betraying him. Dalton trailed behind, silent, haunted. Across the city, Danielle's name became a symbol. Communities that had long felt silence now saw her as a mirror of their own struggles. Hers told their children about her bravery. Veterans praised her composure under fire. People marched with signs that read, "Respect every life," and "Justice has no rank." That night, Danielle stood by her window overlooking the city lights. Her wrists still bore faint red marks from the cuffs. She touched them gently, not as a wound, but as a reminder. She whispered softly, "Dignity is stronger than chains." Her phone buzzed with a new message from Pentagon Command. "Congressional hearing scheduled. You'll testify on misconduct nationwide. Your voice is needed." She exhaled slowly, knowing the battle was no longer about her alone. The two officers thought they had humiliated her. Instead, they had opened the door for a movement larger than either of them could comprehend. And for Chad and Dalton, the nightmare was only beginning. Their names were now on every screen. Their badges weighed heavier than ever, not with honor, but with shame. The hearing, the grand marble halls of Congress echoed with footsteps as journalists crowded outside the chamber. Cameras flashed, microphones jutted forward, and whispers carried through the air like static. Inside, the room was packed. Politicians, military leaders, civil rights advocates, and citizens who had come to see justice unfold. At the center of it all sat Brigadier General Danielle Brooks, calm as stone, her uniform adorned with ribbons that spoke of decades of sacrifice. The chairperson struck the gavel. "This hearing will address the unlawful arrest of General Brooks and the broader issue of racial profiling within law enforcement." The first speaker called was Sergeant Chad Wilkinson. His uniform looked disheveled, his posture unsteady. He adjusted his tie nervously, eyes darting between the committee and the crowd. "We were simply following procedure," he began, his voice cracking. "She appeared suspicious, exiting a high-value vehicle in a neighborhood where she didn't seem to belong. We had reason to believe—" "Reason to believe what, Sergeant?" a senator interrupted sharply. "That being black and driving a luxury car is probable cause?" The room buzzed with murmurs. Chad stumbled, words fumbling. Dalton, sitting beside him, kept his head low, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Then it was Danielle's turn. She rose, shoulders squared, voice deep and steady. I have led men and women into war zones. I have carried the weight of lives on my shoulders, but that night, none of that mattered. To those officers, I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a leader. I wasn't even a human being worthy of respect. I was a target because of my skin. The room fell into silence. Cameras zoomed in on her face, the faint marks of the handcuffs still visible on her wrists. She raised them slowly for all to see. This is what it means to be judged before you speak. This is what millions experience when power is abused by those sworn to protect. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Some senators bowed their heads, others clenched their jaws. Chad tried to interject. She's twisting the story, but Danielle's eyes cut through him like a blade. The story is written in every video. The truth is carved in the faces of the witnesses, and the shame, Sergeant, is in your own reflection. The audience erupted in applause, forcing the gavel to strike again for order. One senator leaned forward, voice heavy with resolve. "General Brooks, what would you have us do?" She drew a steady breath. "Hold them accountable, not just for me, but for every silent victim who couldn't call the Pentagon, who couldn't summon cameras, who walked away humiliated and broken. If you let this pass, you tell every officer that prejudice is acceptable behind a badge. If you act, you remind this nation that dignity belongs to all." The words hung in the chamber like a verdict already delivered. Reporters scribbled furiously. Live broadcasts relayed her testimony to millions watching across the nation. Outside crowds gathered with signs, "Justice for all. Respect has no color. General Brooks stands for us." For Chad and Dalton, the walls were closing in. Dalton whispered to his lawyer, "It's over. We're done." But Chad still clenched his fists, anger boiling. "No, I won't let her destroy me." Yet even he knew, every eye in that room, every headline outside, every voice in the crowd was no longer on his side. Danielle's final words before stepping down from the stand rang through the chamber like a command on the battlefield. Justice is not optional. Tonight, it begins here. The applause shook the walls, and for the two disgraced officers, it sounded like the sound of their careers collapsing into dust. Collapse of power. The morning after the congressional hearing, America woke up to a storm. Every news channel replayed General Danielle Brooks's testimony. Her words, "Justice is not optional. Tonight, it begins here," echoed across living rooms, classrooms, and offices. Social media lit up with millions of comments, hashtags, and video shares. She had become a national voice overnight, not because of her rank alone, but because she embodied a truth people had been waiting to hear. In precinct headquarters, the air was thick with dread. Officers whispered in corners, avoiding the gaze of reporters stationed outside the gates. For years, Sergeant Chad Wilkinson had carried himself like he owned every room. Now, as he sat at his desk, his hands trembled. On the wall, his framed certificates and commendations looked like mocking reminders of a reputation already in ruins. The police chief entered with a cold expression. "Chad, Dalton, you're both suspended indefinitely. Internal Affairs is recommending termination." Chad jumped to his feet, slamming his hand on the desk. "You're going to let one woman end our careers? I gave 20 years to this force." The chief's eyes narrowed. "You didn't lose your career because of her. You lost it because of you." Dalton sat silently, his head bowed. He knew there was no savvy in himself. Every attempt to justify their actions collapsed under the mountain of video evidence and public outrage. Unlike Chad, he no longer had fight, only shame. Outside, protesters gathered with banners, "End racial profiling," "No badge for hate." Every chant echoed like a drumbeat, shaking the walls of the precinct. Meanwhile, Danielle walked through a crowded auditorium where veterans and community leaders had gathered to honor her. She wore her uniform that night, medals gleaming under the lights, but her words were not about pride. They were about responsibility. "When I was in the desert commanding troops," she said, her voice steady, "I learned that power without discipline is chaos. These officers showed us what chaos looks like when prejudice guides the badge, but what happened to me must become more than a headline. It must become a turning point. The crowd rose in applause, many with tears in their eyes. Cameras captured every moment, broadcasting her message far beyond the walls of the auditorium. She was no longer just a general, she had become a symbol of resilience and justice. Back in his apartment, Chad watched the speech on television, his fists clenched as Danielle's words cut deeper into his pride. He hurled a glass across the room, shattering it against the wall. "She ruined me!" he shouted. But the truth gnawed at him. He had ruined himself long before that night. Dalton, in contrast, sat alone in silence, scrolling through endless feeds condemning him. His young daughter's face flashed on his phone background. Shame overwhelmed him. He whispered, "What will she think of me when she grows up?" The fallout grew heavier each day. News reports revealed that both officers had multiple complaints filed against them in the past, complaints buried and ignored by the system. Now, under national scrutiny, those cases resurfaced. Every hidden abuse was dragged into daylight. For Danielle, the calls never stopped. Civil rights groups, universities, military academies, everyone wanted her to speak. Yet she remained grounded, never letting the spotlight distract from the larger fight. "This isn't about me," she told a reporter. "This is about every person who has been silenced. If my voice can open doors for them, then I will keep speaking." Her humility resonated more than any anger could. She didn't scream for revenge. She stood for justice. That difference made her unstoppable. By the end of the week, Chad and Dalton's names had been officially struck from the police roster. Their badges were taken, their weapons surrendered. The city they once controlled with arrogance now regarded them with disgust. They had become examples of what happens when prejudice collides with accountability. And as Danielle stood before another crowd, speaking with the same steady strength, she closed with the words that would soon be etched into posters, murals, and movements across the nation. "Respect is not given to rank, wealth, or uniform. It is given to humanity, and humanity has no color." The applause that followed was thunderous, a roar of voices demanding change, and somewhere in the distance, two disgraced former officers realized that their downfall had only just begun. Yet she remained grounded, never letting the spotlight distract from the larger fight. "This isn't about me," she told a reporter. "This is about every person who has been silenced. If my voice can open doors for them, then I will keep speaking." Her humility resonated more than any anger could. She didn't scream for revenge. She stood for justice. That difference made her unstoppable. By the end of the week, Chad and Dalton's names had been officially struck from the police roster. Their badges were taken, their weapons surrendered. The city they once controlled with arrogance now regarded them with disgust. They had become examples of what happens when prejudice collides with accountability. And, as Danielle stood before another crowd, speaking with the same steady strength, she closed with the words that would soon be etched into posters, murals, and movements across the nation. "Respect is not given to rank, wealth, or uniform. It is given to humanity, and humanity has no color." The applause that followed was thunderous, a roar of voices demanding change, and somewhere in the distance, two disgraced former officers realized that their downfall had only just begun. Justice is stronger than hate. Respect has no color,